Montana Territory, August 1882. The dry wind swept through the Bitterroot Valley like a whisper of something unfinished. Silas Dearing stood on the edge of the timberline, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his narrowed eyes. Below him, in the distance, the town of Willow Creek sat quiet in the sun, just as he remembered it. Same crooked church steeple. Same dust curling off the main road. And somewhere in that town, still breathing the same air, was the woman he had never stopped loving. She had once been promised to another, and now she was nearly married to him. Silas wrapped the reins around the saddle horn and stepped down from his horse. He let his boots settle into the dirt, feeling the weight of the last 5 years pressing into the earth beneath him. He had ridden 12 days straight from Wyoming, through smoke and storm, with nothing but his saddlebag, a letter she never answered, and love that refused to die. He was here for her. Nothing else. Her name was Selene Dalton. He had loved her since they were both 17. Back when she wore her father's old hat just to spite him, and he used to sneak her wildflowers from the fields behind the schoolhouse. He had kissed her once beneath the cottonwoods by the river and promised he'd come back for her, right before he joined the war effort. He had come back, just a year too late. That was 5 years ago. Now she was 23, and word had reached him in Cheyenne that she was due to marry a man named Branson Wyatt, a rancher with money, land, and a kind of ambition that smelled like oil and sweat. Silas had nothing but his horse, his grit, and the memory of her eyes when she told him she would wait. He walked the final mile, hat in hand, heart pounding like hooves on hardpan. Willow Creek had changed. There was a new hotel where the old cooper's shop used to be. The saloon had a fresh coat of paint. But the Dalton place white fencing, blue shutters, a porch swing with a loose chain looked exactly the same. Selene was there, bent over the garden with dirt-streaked gloves and a wide straw hat covering her dark hair. Her back straightened when she heard his boots on the gravel. She turned. Her breath caught. "Silas?" Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. He nodded once. "I came back." She took a step forward, then froze. "You, why now?" "I never stopped thinking about you. I heard you were about to marry Branson Wyatt." Her jaw tightened. "You should have come sooner." "I know," he said. "But I am here now. I came with nothing but the truth. I love you, Selene. I never stopped." She looked down at her gloves, then back at him. Her eyes were glassy. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You left, Silas. And Branson was here. He helped when my father passed. He kept food on the table. I am not trying to take away his kindness. But I need you to know I did not stay away because I wanted to. I was hurt. After the war, it took time for me to walk again. I did not want you seeing me broken. You should have let me decide that." "I know," he said again. "I was a fool." A silence settled between them. Wind moved through the cottonwoods behind the house. Finally she said, "I have not said yes to him yet." Hope sparked in his chest. "But he is expecting an answer by Sunday," she added. Silas stepped closer. "Then give me until then." "For what?" "To prove that you are still mine. Not by obligation, but because your heart says so." She studied him, eyes searching his face like she was trying to find the boy she used to know beneath the stubble and sunburn. "All right," she said quietly. "Until Sunday." He exhaled slow. "Thank you." That night Silas stayed in a room above the general store. He hardly slept. He stared at the ceiling, remembering the scent of her hair, the way she used to laugh when she danced barefoot in the rain. He had 3 days to remind her of what they were. And what they could still be. The next morning, he found her in town, helping a widow gather supplies for the schoolhouse. She tried to act like she had not been looking for him too, but he saw her smile when she saw his shadow stretch beside hers. They spent the day walking the edge of the river where they used to fish. She laughed more than he expected, and once, when he helped her cross a stream, she let her hand rest in his longer than it needed to. But the moment was short-lived. That evening, Branson Wyatt rode up to the Dalton house, all polished boots and a bouquet of prairie roses. Silas watched from the fence line. Selene went inside with Branson and closed the door. The next morning, Silas saddled his horse and rode out before dawn. He needed space to think, to breathe. But 3 miles out of town, he saw smoke. A wagon overturned. A woman screaming. He kicked his horse into a gallop. By the time he reached the wreck, 2 young boys were crying near the brush while a woman bloodied and shaken tried to pull another child from the wagon. The horse had bolted. The axle was shattered. Silas jumped down. "How many?" "3, my boys." "Please, my littlest, he is trapped." He dropped to his knees, wedged himself under the broken axle, and with a grunt that ripped through his ribs, he heaved until the wood shifted enough to pull the child free. The boy, maybe 5, was sobbing but alive. The woman collapsed with relief. "Thank you? Thank you?" Silas nodded, cradling the child until the hurt in his shoulder flared white-hot. He rode back to town with the family, kept his distance once they were safe. But as he turned down the lane to head back toward his room, Selene was there on the porch, arms folded. "I heard what you did. It was just luck I was there." "No," she said, walking toward him. "It was not." He dismounted. The sun was dipping behind the hills. Her eyes were soft now, full of something he had not seen in them for a long time. "Silas," she said, "I told Branson I cannot marry him." He stepped closer. "And why is that?" "Because the part of me that ever wanted comfort or safety died the day I thought you had." His heart thudded hard. She reached up and touched his cheek. "You did come back. With nothing but love." He leaned into her palm. "It is all I have. It is all I want." He kissed her then, slow and certain, and the years between them fell away like dust from old boots. And just like that, she was his again. 2 mornings after she told Branson Wyatt no, Selene stood barefoot in the chill of her kitchen, a pot of coffee slowly darkening on the stove. The floorboards were cold beneath her feet, and the dawn light came in soft, brushing pale gold across the table where her father used to sit with the ledger and a pipe he never quite managed to quit. The air inside felt thinner than usual, like something had shifted loose and hadn't quite settled back into place. She heard boots on the porch. The knock was quiet, almost hesitant. When she opened the door, Silas stood there with a basket in his hands, the scent of warm bread rising from beneath a clean cotton cloth. "I traded some firewood for it," he said, holding it out. "Mrs. Lafferty said you liked hers best." Selene took it, the warmth of the basket seeping into her palms. "I haven't had her bread in a long time. She still bakes it the same. Sweet with caraway." She stepped aside to let him in. "I've got coffee." He followed her in without a word, setting his hat on the table and brushing dust from his sleeves. The silence between them wasn't soft or sharp, just familiar, the kind that came from knowing each other too well to need filling. She poured 2 cups, handed him one, and leaned against the counter. He stood near the stove, steam rising between them. "I've been thinking," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "About the land west of the foothills. That hollow past Miller's Creek." "What about it?" "I passed through there on my way in. There's an old line shack, half sunk into the earth. Needs a roof and a door, but the bones are there. Flat ground. Clean spring. It'd take work, but it's good land." Selene didn't look away. "You thinking of staying?" "I came here for you, not to pass through." She sipped the coffee, letting the warmth settle deep in her chest. "It'd be a hard start. I've done harder." She studied him. The man standing before her had weather in his skin and a weight behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Not broken-tempered. You'd build a place for us," she said, not as a question. He nodded. "If you want it." She looked out the window. The garden rose still slept beneath the soil, waiting for autumn to pass and spring to return. "I want to see it," she said. They rode out after breakfast, her on her father's old bay mare, Silas leading the way down a narrowing trail through stands of pine. The air held the edge of coming cold, and the mountains in the distance had begun to catch snow in their cracks. The shack sat low in a clearing, crooked but still upright. The chimney had crumbled, but the stones remained piled neat beside it, like someone meant to fix it but never got around to it. Selene walked the perimeter, her skirts brushing dried thistle. When she reached the back, she crouched near the spring, clear and steady, bubbling from beneath a shale outcrop. She turned to find him watching her. "It's quiet here," she said. "Could stay that way." She stood, brushing her hands on her apron. "It'd need glass for the windows. I can trade for panes in Missoula. Might take me a week. And the chimney? I'll set it right." "I remember how." Selene crossed back toward him, the wind tugging at loose strands of her hair. "You're not asking me to dream, are you?" "No," he said. "I'm asking you to build something real. With me." She stepped close enough to see the sun catch in his lashes. "You're not the same boy who left." "I know. But I'm not the same girl either." "I don't want her back," he said. "I want you now. Just as you are." She reached out and took his hand. His fingers curled around hers, firm and sure. "I'll help with the roof," she said. They spent the rest of the day gathering what they could, clearing the inside, stacking kindling. They didn't speak much, but the quiet was full like breath between heartbeats. By dusk, smoke rose from a makeshift fire pit, and they sat beside it, knees nearly touching. Selene poked the embers with a stick. "What happened to your left leg?" He didn't answer right away. "Minneball. Near Antietam. Took a year before I could ride again. You never told me. I didn't want you to see me like that. I would have stayed," she said. "I know that now." She set the stick down. "You can tell me things. Even the hard parts." He looked at her, his voice low. "Will you stay tonight?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." They slept beside the fire, wrapped in separate blankets, but with her hand resting against his chest. The wind outside picked up, but inside the walls they'd begun to rebuild. It was warm. And in that warmth, something new began to grow. Not the return of what had been lost, but the start of something sturdier. Something made by hand, by choice, by love that had waited long enough. The first snow came early, brushing the timberline with frost by the second week of September. It didn't stay, but it left a hush over the land, as if the hills themselves were pausing to listen. Selene pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped from the cabin, her breath curling in the morning air. The roof was patched now, the chimney rebuilt with stones Silas had hauled from the creek. Smoke lifted steady from its mouth. The place still leaned a little to the east, but it stood. Inside, Silas was crouched by the hearth, setting a kettle on the hook. He turned at her footsteps, eyes catching hers beneath the brim of his hat. "I found 2 boards solid enough for the new doorframe," he said. "Might take another day to chisel them down." She nodded, stepping over the threshold. "I'll help with the hinges. There's a rusted set in the barn we can clean." He poured water into 2 tin cups and handed her one. His hands were rougher than they'd been a week ago, calluses thickening at the base of each finger. She traced the rim of the cup, watching steam rise. "I got a letter from Aunt Hester," she said. "She's coming north before the pass closes. Wants to see where I've gone and who I've gone with." Silas leaned against the wall beside her. "Will she come with questions or warnings?" Selene gave a half smile. "Both. I'll meet her honest. She's not one for gentle words. I'm not one for false ones." Selene sipped the water, the iron tang of the tin grounding her. "She raised my father after their parents died. She doesn't give her trust easy. I don't expect her to. But I'll earn it if she'll let me." Selene reached for the basket of dried apples on the shelf, tossing one to him. "She'll ask where we're sleeping. I'll tell her the truth. We're sharing a roof, not a bed." He caught the apple and met her gaze. "I know the difference." She bit into one of her own, the tartness catching at the corner of her mouth. It's not that I don't trust you. I'd never want more than you're ready to give. She looked at him long, the silence between them thickening like rising dough. Then she turned and stepped outside again. That afternoon, they rode to town to trade for salt and lamp oil. The trail down was muddy, the horses skidding slightly on the slope. Selene kept her eyes ahead, her hair tucked under a scarf, a basket tied to her saddle. At the mercantile, Mr. Bowers handed her the oil tin and looked between them. Word is you're settling out west of the Miller place. Silas nodded. That's right. Bowers grunted. That land's quiet. Nearest neighbor's 5 miles. We like it that way, Selene said. On the ride back, a hawk circled above, its shadow flickering across the grass. I heard Wyatt's been asking where you went, Silas said quietly. Selene's jaw tightened. He saw his answer. He won't come looking? He's prideful, not foolish. Silas didn't answer right away. If he does, he won't. She nudged her mare forward, the wind catching the edge of her scarf. You're not responsible for every storm. They made it back before dusk. Selene stored the oil in the crate by the door while Silas unsaddled the horses. That night, they sat on the floor beside the hearth, a blanket stretched between them and a pot of beans simmering low. Selene shifted her legs beneath her skirt. Did you ever plan on coming back before you heard about Branson? Silas stirred the pot twice before answering. I wrote you 3 letters. Never sent them. Why not? The words kept sounding like apologies. I didn't think you needed more sorrow. She lowered her eyes, the firelight catching the curve of her cheek. I would have read them anyway, she said. Even the parts that hurt. He set the spoon down. Do you want them now? No. I want you here, not your regrets. She stood then, crossing to the hearth, and lifted the pot from the hook. He reached for a tin bowl, and their fingers brushed. That night she laid her bedroll near his, closer than before. Not touching, but near enough he could hear the change in her breath when she turned onto her side. Silas? She whispered. Yeah? Would you have stayed even if I hadn't chosen you? He was quiet for a long time. No, he said. I came for you. If you'd been gone, I'd have had no reason to stay. She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, thank you for telling me. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind moved through the grass. Inside, sleep came slow and deep, and for the first time in years, either of them dreamed of anything missing. The morning Aunt Hester arrived. The wind was sharp enough to lift the skirts off the grass and send the chimney smoke trailing sideways. Selene had risen early, scrubbing the table with lye soap and readying the braid in her hair with a piece of ribbon that hadn't seen daylight since her father's burial. Silas was outside, splitting kindling with clean, even strikes, the rhythm carrying through the open window like a heartbeat steadying the room. They'd spent the earlier part of the week finishing the door, planing the edges until it shut without a groan. The hinges still caught if it swelled, but Selene figured that was as much a reminder of weather as anything else. She liked the sound of it now real earned. Around midday, the wagon creaked up the trail, 2 mules and a driver hired from town. Aunt Hester climbed down with her usual economy of movement, spare and upright as a fence post. Her coat was black wool, hemmed stiff with dust, and her bonnet sat low over pale eyes that missed nothing. You built this yourself? She asked, not yet crossing the threshold. With Silas, Selene said, drying her hands on her apron. The older woman stepped inside, gaze sweeping the cabin from hearth to rafters. Smells of ash and coffee. Better than some. Silas held back near the fire, hands loose at his sides. Hester's eyes found him, assessing. You're the one who left to fight, she said. I am. You come back with land? No, ma'am. Just my hands and whatever your niece still wants from them. Hester's mouth curved, not into a smile, but something close to understanding. We'll see. That night, they ate quietly salt pork, beans, and bread warmed on the coals. Hester sat near the stove, her cane resting against one knee, watching Selene and Silas as if she were noting the way their bodies turned toward each other without thought. "You've always been stubborn," Hester said to Selene, picking at the edge of her plate. "But you were never foolish." "I haven't forgotten either," Selene replied. "Then help me understand this. A man leaves, and you build a life on what didn't die." "No," Selene said. "I'm building it on what lived." Silas didn't speak, but he reached across the space between them and laid his palm against the floor near hers. Her fingers shifted just enough to brush his. Later, after Hester had gone to the cot and pulled the wool blanket over her shoulders without a word of goodnight, Selene stepped outside into the cold. The stars were out, sharp and white above the dark line of the trees. She heard Silas come up behind her, the door creaking before it latched shut. "She'll want more proof," Selene said, arms folded against the wind. "She can have it," he answered. "You won't win her with words." "I don't plan to." They stood silent for a long stretch, the wind combing through the grass around their boots. "She buried 3 brothers," Selene said at last. 2 in the war, 1 in a mining cave-in. She's seen men promise and not return." "I did return," Silas said. "Not when I should have. But I'm here now." Selene turned to him, her face shadowed but calm. "I want you to ask her for her blessing." He didn't flinch. "I will." The next morning, while Selene hauled water from the spring, Silas sat across from Hester at the table. The older woman set down her cup, her fingers bone-thin around the handle. "She's strong because she had to be," she said, not looking at him. "Not because she wanted to." "I know. You planning to make her soft again?" "No. Just safe enough to be herself." Hester nodded once, as if that was the only answer she'd accept. "Show me the fence line." They walked the property, Hester leaning on her cane, Silas steady beside her. She asked about the soil, the drainage, the length of the growing season. He answered each question without overreach, never claiming more than he knew. By the time they returned, her boots were crusted with mud and her breath came shorter. She sat on the porch while Selene brought her a wool shawl. "You'll need more kindling before the month's out," she said. "We'll cut more," Selene replied. "And you'll need another pair of hands come spring." "I'll manage," Selene said. Hester looked to Silas. "You'll marry before then?" "If she'll have me." Selene didn't look away. "I will." Hester nodded, folding the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Then I'll stay long enough to see it done." She rose, stepped inside, and left them alone on the porch. Silas reached for Selene's hand. "You sure?" Her fingers laced with his. "I don't want anything less than forever. I want to build it with you." "You already are." They stood there, watching the sun drop behind the ridge, the cabin warm behind them, and the future stretching out, not as a promise, but as a path they would walk side by side, with nothing but love and the strength to see it through. The wedding was held under a sky the color of worn linen, with a breeze that stirred the pine boughs like a slow hymn. They'd cleared the north edge of the clearing for it, where the ground sloped gently toward the creek, and laid down pine needles to soften the earth. Selene wore her mother's shawl over a dress she'd let out at the seams herself, the stitches small and sure. Silas stood in his only good shirt, sleeves rolled to the wrist, collar pressed flat with soap and patience. And Hester stood as witness, her cane planted in the soil beside her, boots dusted from the walk down. She didn't weep, but she held Selene's hand longer than necessary when they exchanged their vows, and her voice didn't roughen when she pronounced them joined. There was no music, just wind and water and the hush that falls when something right finally settles into place. Later, while the sun dipped below the edge of the ridge, they shared bread and dried fruit with the few neighbors who'd managed to ride Mrs. Lafferty from the edge of town, and the 2 older Holcomb brothers who'd helped Silas raise the new beam over the porch. They stayed until the fire burned low, offering quiet congratulations and then excusing themselves without fanfare. When the last horse's hooves had faded into the dark, Selene leaned against the post near the door, her hair loose down her back, no longer pinned or braided. Silas stood beside her, arms folded, watching the last embers fall. "You nervous?" she asked. "No," he said. "Just waiting. For you to tell me what comes next." She turned to face him, the glow from inside catching in her eyes. "We finish what we started. We plant in spring. We patch the east wall. We keep each other fed. And we don't look back." He took her hand, his thumb brushing the curve of her wrist. "That's all I ever wanted." That night, they shared the bed they'd built from pine and rope, the mattress stuffed with straw and wool. There was no hesitation between them, no lingering distance. They moved like a pair of rivers finally meeting, slow, steady, inevitable. The weeks that followed were marked by the rhythm of a new life. Silas rose early to check the snares and stack wood, returning with the scent of frost still clinging to his coat. Selene kept the cabin warm, her hands busy with mending or kneading, her eyes lifting each time he crossed the threshold. They spoke less of the past, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer weighed them down. Hester stayed through the first frost, her movements slower, but her gaze no less sharp. She spent most afternoons near the hearth, reading aloud from the Bible or carving lengths of birch down to kindling with a knife worn smooth at the handle. One evening, she placed a small parcel wrapped in muslin on the table and nudged it toward Selene. "Your mother's," she said. "Kept it wrapped in the old cedar chest till now." Inside was a square of lace, yellowed at the edges but intact. A christening cloth. Selene looked up, startled. "You think we'll need this?" "Not yet," Hester said. "But maybe soon." By the first thaw, Hester took the wagon back south, satisfied that what she'd seen would hold. She hugged Selene tight, whispered something only she could hear, and gave Silas a nod that meant more than words. Spring came slow, the snow receding inch by inch until green pushed up along the creek banks. Silas repaired the fence lines and rebuilt the lean-to for the animals they planned to trade for. Selene prepared seed bundles, her hands reddened from soaking and sorting. One morning, while she was boiling water for washing, she paused at the doorway, one hand resting low on her belly. She waited until Silas returned, his boots muddy and his coat damp from river mist. "I think," she said, "we ought to build a cradle soon." He didn't speak right away, just crossed the space between them and rested his hand gently over hers. "All right," he said. "We will." They planted together that spring, rows of beans and cabbage and early corn. The cabin filled with the smell of bread and peat smoke, and birds nested in the eaves. In the evenings they sat on the porch with their knees touching, watching the light change on the hills and the stars come in one by one. Their love never needed declaring again. It lived in the way he poured her a cup before his own, in the way she folded his shirts so the buttons wouldn't warp, in the way their fingers brushed when passing the tin between them, or how they paused to watch the wind move through the trees, saying nothing at all. Years passed that way. They built a barn. They added a second room. 2 children followed, a boy with sharp eyes and a girl with Selene's quiet strength. The cradle sat by the hearth until they no longer needed it, and then it stayed, a reminder of beginnings. They grew older together, not easily, but well. The land gave them enough, never more than they needed, and never less than they could stand. In time, neighbors came to call it the Dearing place, a patch of quiet steadiness west of Miller's Creek. And through it all, Silas and Selene remained what they were from the first, 2 people who had chosen each other not for ease or comfort, but because they knew the worth of a love that had been tested, and survived. They never left that land. They never needed to.